When my parents gave my sister a $100,000 check for her new house and told me they had nothing left to give, I realized exactly what I meant to them. It wasn't just a moment. It was the confirmation of years of quiet truth I'd tried not to see. I'm Evelyn Rowe, 29, born and raised in rural Missouri. My family's soybean farm sits on a patch of land that smells like sweat, mud, and history. My parents, Lorraine and Tom, used to call it the heart of the rose, but it never felt like much of a heart to me, more like a weight I was chained to. My younger sister, Maisie, was the golden child, all sunshine and bright futures. She left for the city right after college, chasing real success, while I stayed behind when Dad got sick, keeping the farm running through floods, frost, and overdue bills. They said it was temporary, that I'd be compensated later, that family takes care of family. I believed them. For years, I worked sunup to sundown, patching roofs, mending fences, hauling soy like my life depended on it. And maybe it did. But when Dad recovered, nothing changed. The promises faded into chores, and the gratitude turned into criticism. Mom would say I had farmer's hands, not a future. And Dad would just nod like he agreed, but didn't want to admit it. When Maisie came home one weekend, her nails were perfect, her smile blinding. She breezed through the kitchen talking about the condo she wanted to buy, about how the city is just so expensive. Mom and Dad looked at each other with that silent language they share, the kind that usually ends with me cleaning up something. Then, right there at the table, Dad pulled out a checkbook. "We want to help you get started," he told Maisie, his voice soft with pride. "You deserve it, sweetheart." He wrote the number out, $100,000, while I sat across from them with calloused hands and dirt under my nails. Maisie squealed, hugged them both, and didn't even look my way. I waited for someone to say something, for Mom to explain, for Dad to mention me, but all I got was a casual glance. "We wish we could do something for you too, Ev," Mom said. "But we've got nothing left to give. You'll always have the farm, though. That's your inheritance, memories and all." The words hit like gravel in my chest. Memories. As if all my years of work, all the blisters, all the lonely nights fixing tractors under the moonlight, were just sentimental trinkets. Maisie laughed, tossing her perfect hair. "Honestly, Ev, what would you even do with that kind of money?" I didn't answer. I just stood up, wiped my hands on my jeans, and walked out. Outside, the air smelled of dirt and frost. The sky was turning gold over the soybean fields, my fields. They could keep their money. I still had the one thing they couldn't buy. Before the sun ever touched the fields, I was already awake. The barn lights flickered weakly as I hauled feed, my breath fogging in the chill. That was my life before I even learned long division, mud on my boots, hay in my hair, and the echo of Mom's voice reminding me not to be late for school after chores. Maisie never had to do the morning work. She'd still be asleep when I came in, smelling like hay and diesel, while Mom set out pancakes for her because she had a big day at school. Every day was a big day for Maisie, spelling bees, talent shows, her name on some honor roll. Mine was just another name on the attendance list. At school, teachers loved her. At home, Mom worshipped her. "Maisie's got her daddy's brains," she'd say, then glance at me with a sigh. "You've got his hands, rough, good for hard work." She said it like it was a curse, and maybe it was. I tried to prove her wrong. I'd come home with decent grades, nothing fancy, but she'd barely glance up. "Books won't fix a broken fence, Evelyn," she'd say, turning back to whatever Maisie was showing her on her phone. Dad was softer, or at least he tried to be. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet, he'd find me out in the barn brushing the old mare. He'd put a hand on my shoulder and murmur, "I see what you do for this place. Don't think I don't." I'd nod, pretending his words meant more than they did. He always followed them with the same promise, that someday he'd make it even. "Maisie gets the attention now," he'd say, "but you'll get your reward when the time comes." The time never came. The older we got, the wider the gap grew. Maisie's future was something the whole town seemed to talk about: scholarships, college visits, a bright path paved in praise. Mine was fixed right there in the dirt, tied to the same fences I'd mended since childhood. When she left for the city, there were tears and gifts and a family dinner in her honor. When I stayed to help with the farm, Mom said, "Well, someone has to stay behind." I used to think love was supposed to be fair, that hard work counted for something. But growing up in that house taught me otherwise. Love, for them, was performance. Maisie smiled the right way, said the right things. I didn't. There's a moment I still remember. I was 16, sweaty from baling hay, and Mom stood on the porch watching me. she called out. "You'll thank me someday for teaching you real work." I looked at her, hands blistered, back aching, and thought, maybe I will. But deep down, a different thought took root, one that never really left. I'd thank her someday in my own way. The kitchen smelled like roast chicken and fresh rolls, the kind of meal Mom only made when something big was coming. I'd come straight from the fields, boots still dusty, hands raw from fixing a fence post. Maisie was already seated, polished as ever, her hair shining under the soft light. Dad poured her wine himself, smiling like she'd just come home from saving the world. Mom cleared her throat. "We've got something special tonight," she said, glancing at Dad. He reached into his pocket and slid a white envelope across the table toward Maisie. She tilted her head, curious, and then gasped when she saw the check. $100,000, she whispered, her voice trembling with delight. I froze. My fork clinked against the plate. "For your house, sweetheart," Dad said proudly. "You've worked so hard, and we want to help you get settled." Maisie covered her mouth, eyes wide, and leaned over to hug them both. The moment felt endless. Their laughter, their words of pride, the soft glow of love that somehow never reached me. I waited for Dad to look my way, to say anything, even a small word of thanks for the years I'd spent holding everything together while they were busy celebrating her. But he didn't. When the noise quieted, Mom finally turned to me. "Evelyn," she said gently, "we wish we could do something for you, too, but there's just nothing left right now." The words slid across the table like a blade. Maisie laughed then, twirling the check between her fingers. "Come on, Mom. Even if you did, what would she do with that kind of money? Buy more tractor parts." They all chuckled, even Dad, not loudly, but enough for me to feel the sting. I kept my eyes on the tablecloth, tracing the tiny stitched flowers to keep from crying. My chest burned, but I stayed quiet. When the laughter faded, Dad cleared his throat. "It's not that we don't appreciate what you've done, Ev," he said, avoiding my eyes. You're not really built for that kind of success. You're more grounded. Practical. That's your gift. My gift." Maisie was still smiling, already dreaming aloud about house colors and furniture. Mom kept nodding, picturing the future that apparently belonged to someone else's daughter. I looked around that table. The same one I'd scrubbed 1,000 times, the one I'd set and cleared while they toasted Maisie's milestones, and something hollowed out inside me. I pushed back my chair quietly. "Excuse me," I said. No one looked up. Outside, the night air was sharp, smelling faintly of soy and dust. I could still hear their laughter through the window, soft and distant. For the first time, it didn't hurt the way it used to. It just felt final. By the time their voices faded, I'd already made up my mind. Something inside me had cracked, but not broken. Something else had started growing in the space where the hurt used to live. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into the drive. The farmhouse stood in its usual silence, the paint long peeled by years of sun and storms. A shutter hung loose, creaking when the wind passed through. It wasn't much to look at, but it was mine in a way no other place ever had been. I'd kept it alive the best I could, patching leaks, mowing fields, keeping the pipes from freezing each winter. Inside, the air held the faint smell of old wood and dust. I set my keys on the counter and stared at the cracked linoleum, remembering when it wasn't cracked at all. Grandpa used to sit at the table right there, teaching me how to balance accounts and read soil maps. "The land doesn't lie," he'd tell me, sliding a calloused hand over the table. "It just needs someone who listens." He died when I was 17, and everything he built seemed to fade a little more each year after that. I walked through the narrow hall, brushing my fingers along the faded wallpaper. Every scuff and mark had a story. The house sagged in places, but it was still standing, same as me. I poured a cup of coffee, sat on the porch steps, and watched the last light sink behind the trees. The field stretched out like a memory I couldn't let go of. Later, when the crickets started up, I went to the attic to dig out an old blanket. The floorboards groaned beneath me as I pulled open a chest of forgotten things. Yellowed photos, rusted tools, letters from people long gone. Then I found a box tucked deep in the corner, sealed with brittle tape. My name was scrawled on the top in Grandpa's handwriting. I hesitated before opening it. Inside were papers, deeds, ledgers, and a neatly folded envelope. The handwriting was firm, familiar. It was his will. I sat back, my hands trembling as I unfolded it under the flickering light. Most of it was what I expected: the accounts, the machinery, the notes about his debts. But then, near the end, a single line caught me off guard. The property and farmland were to be left to me, Evelyn Mayrow, not to my parents. I read it twice, then a third time, the words burning brighter each pass. For years, I'd believed I was holding this place together for them, feeding their legacy with my time, my labor, my life. But I'd been keeping my own inheritance alive all along. They hadn't given me anything, they couldn't. It was never theirs to give. The house creaked softly as if it knew I'd finally seen the truth. I sat there until the moon climbed high, the will open in my lap, and felt something shift inside me, small but certain. Not anger this time, not sorrow. Just a quiet, steady spark. The next morning, I folded the papers carefully into a manila envelope and drove into town. The county office sat between the post office and a pawn shop, its walls lined with filing cabinets that smelled faintly of dust and ink. The clerk, an older man with glasses slipping down his nose, took the documents from me without much expression. "I just need to confirm ownership records," I said, keeping my voice steady. He nodded, adjusted his glasses, and began typing. The hum of the computer filled the silence. I watched his fingers move, heart pounding louder with each click. After a few minutes, he looked up. "It's all here," he said simply. "This property was transferred directly to you, Miss Rowe. Hasn't been amended since the original filing." My throat went dry. "So, my parents?" He shook his head. "They're not listed anywhere. You've been the legal owner since your grandfather's passing." I thanked him quietly, took the stamped verification, and stepped outside. The sunlight hit hard and clean. For a long time, I just stood there, holding the papers like proof of something I'd always felt but never dared to believe. All those years of being told I owed them, that I was working for the family. It had been my land, my sweat, my survival. Driving back, the fields rolled by in shades of green and brown, more alive than I'd noticed before. The fences needed mending, the barn roof sagged, but it all looked different now. Not like a burden, but a beginning. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Not yet. I knew how they'd spin it. How Mom would twist her face into that disappointed frown. How Dad would talk about shared heritage and family understanding. No, I'd spent too many years under their version of truth. This time, I'd move on my own terms. That week, I started fixing things. Real work. Not the kind that feels like penance, but the kind that builds something. I patched the roof, replaced rusted hinges, cleaned out the barn that had become a graveyard for forgotten tools. Every nail I drove into the boards felt like reclaiming another inch of myself. At night, I made plans. Not big dreams, just ideas that felt mine for once. Maybe a roadside produce stand, maybe renting out part of the land. I wasn't sure yet. What mattered was that I could finally see a future without their permission. Each morning, I woke before dawn like always, but the weight in my chest was gone. The farm looked the same, but it breathed differently now, steadier, freer. The truth had changed everything, even if no one else knew it yet. I wasn't going to rush the next step. Some things needed time. And for the first time in my life, time finally felt like it belonged to me. The summer arrived like a wall of heat, relentless and unyielding. The soil cracked under the sun, the soybean leaves curling into themselves, and the creek that usually ran through the back of the property had all but disappeared. Water tanks ran low, and the well was sputtering. Every plan I had made felt fragile, teetering on the edge of disaster. I tried to stretch what I had, rationing water, prioritizing crops, patching irrigation lines with scraps. But it was clear that without extra funds, the farm wouldn't survive the month. My savings were minimal, earmarked for repairs and essentials. I swallowed my pride and called my parents, hoping for a lifeline. "Evelyn," Dad said, voice tight, "we've already done what we could for Maisie." "That's enough," Mom added. "We can't help you this time. You always find a way, don't you?" I stared at the phone, disbelief and anger knotting together. The drought wasn't something I could find a way around alone. I hung up, hands shaking, heart heavy. A few days later, I saw Maisie drive past the farmhouse in a brand new SUV, her husband at the wheel. She waved, oblivious, flashing a grin as if everything she touched should sparkle. I clenched my fists, feeling a sharp, bitter awareness. They'd given her everything she wanted, while I had to scrape to keep what had always been mine alive. I spent the night walking the fields, dry stalks crunching beneath my boots, wondering if letting go would be easier. Selling the farm would mean freedom from constant worry, from the exhaustion that left me hollow at the end of each day. Maybe it was what they thought I deserved anyway. Nothing but struggle. But then I remembered Grandpa's voice, low and firm, from years ago. Never let go of what's yours. He'd meant the land, meant the work, meant holding your own when the world tries to take it from you. His words warmed me, steadied me. The farm wasn't just dirt and crops. It was proof of resilience, of belonging, of a legacy they couldn't erase. By morning, I was already moving. I patched the irrigation lines more thoroughly, dug trenches to conserve what water remained, and reinforced the barn supports. Sweat poured down my back, but I felt lighter somehow, stronger. Letting the farm go would be surrender. Holding it meant defiance, survival, and eventually victory. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. The drought would test me, push me to my limits, but I wasn't about to hand over the one thing that defined me. My grandparents' words echoed in every step I took across the scorched land. Never, ever let go. The hum of the engine on the gravel driveway startled me mid-morning. I looked up to see a car I didn't recognize, tires kicking up dust as it rolled toward the farmhouse. Maisie stepped out first, impeccably dressed despite the rural dust swirling around her, Greg trailing behind with a cardboard box tucked under his arm. "I know this is sudden," Maisie said, her smile tight. "But we hit a rough patch. The city house, it didn't work out. Foreclosure, all of it. We just need somewhere to stay for a little while." Greg nodded, looking apologetic. "We wouldn't bother you otherwise." I studied them for a long moment, weighing the words, sensing the invisible hand behind this visit. My parents' faces flashed in my mind, probably suggesting the farm as a temporary refuge, spinning it as a kindness while knowing how I'd react. I took a deep breath and said, "Fine. You can stay, but just for a limited time." Maisie's eyebrows lifted, surprise flickering across her features, but she didn't argue. "Of course, Evelyn. We'll be respectful. Just until we get back on our feet." I showed them to the guest room, guiding them past the fields that had survived the drought, past the barn I'd spent countless hours reinforcing. My eyes lingered on the roof, the patched fences, the rows of stubborn crops still holding on, my work, my claim, my ground. Once they settled, I went back outside. I walked the perimeter of the property, inspecting weak spots, loose boards, and gates that might need extra attention now that more people were living here. Every step I took was a quiet preparation, not for confrontation yet, but for boundaries, subtle, firm, unspoken. I didn't need to announce it, they'd find out soon enough. I'd host them, but I wouldn't surrender control. The land had been mine all along, and no amount of lost city ventures or tearful appeals would change that. As the sun began to dip behind the fields, I lingered on the porch, listening to the faint sounds of them unpacking inside. My hands itched to dig, repair, reinforce, anything to remind myself that while they were visitors, I was the keeper of this place. The farm was alive beneath my feet, steady, unyielding, and it would remain so. This was temporary, yes, but my vigilance was permanent. Every plan I made, every repair I completed, was a silent assertion. I controlled the land, and no one, not even Maisie or my parents, would erase that. By the third week, it was impossible to ignore. Maisie had rearranged the living room, brought in new curtains, and even started sketching ideas for a garden she claimed would modernize the place. I found her inviting my parents over for dinner without so much as a glance at me, as if the farmhouse had suddenly become a showroom for her plans. When Lorraine came over one afternoon, her voice was syrupy with false concern. "Evelyn," she said, leaning against the kitchen counter, "you've done well keeping this place, but honestly, it's only fair. This farm belongs to the family. We all have a stake in it." I felt something inside me tighten, a wire snapping under pressure. Years of quiet endurance, of bending to their expectations, of watching my life be minimized, it all surged at once. I stepped into the living room, past the new curtains and rearranged furniture, and let the papers fall from my hands onto the table. The deed, the official documents, the will Grandpa had left, landed with a definitive thump. "I'm not sharing what's mine," I said, voice sharp and unflinching. I watched their expressions shift. Shock first, then a falter, and finally the silent acknowledgement of truth that had been buried for decades. Maisie's smile wavered, faltered, then disappeared entirely. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Dad's hand twitched as if to speak, then froze midair. Mom's face paled, her false cheer evaporating in an instant. "You've been living here," I continued, leaning on the table, "using my land, benefiting from my work, thinking it belonged to you. But this," I tapped the deed, "has always been mine. Not the family's. Mine. Everything else has been borrowed from me." The silence stretched thick and heavy, and I let it linger. No apologies, no excuses, no pleading. Just the undeniable fact laid bare between us. For the first time, I felt the weight shift. The farmhouse no longer felt like borrowed ground. The authority, the ownership, the right to call this place my own was visible and undeniable. They sat there, stunned and speechless, while I breathed in the room that had been mine all along, watching them finally grasp the truth. And in that quiet, the years of compromise and patience solidified into something unshakable. My claim, my power, my victory. I gave them the notice one quiet morning, sliding the typed letter across the kitchen table. 30 days. Not a single word of argument, just the facts. Maisie stared at it as if the paper had burned her fingers, her eyes wide, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "This isn't fair," Mom cried, clutching the edge of the counter. "We'll die without this place. You can't just—" "I can," I said, my voice trembling, but steady enough to hold them at bay. "It's mine. Always has been. You've forgotten that." Maisie's voice broke in, sharp and accusing. "You're betraying family. How could you do this to us?" I let her words hang in the air, then leaned on the counter and met each of their eyes in turn. "Do you remember every time you told me I was useless? Every glance of disappointment, every sigh when I tried to prove myself? I kept this farm running when no one else cared. I fed it, repaired it, held it together while you built your lives on someone else's work. That's not betrayal. That's survival." Mom sank onto a chair, shaking, while Dad's face turned red, tight with something between anger and shame. Maisie fumed, gripping the letter in her hands, but there was no arguing the truth. The days crawled by. I checked the barns, fixed a gate, and ensured the fields were thriving, all while they moved about like guests unwilling to leave. I kept my distance, letting the tension simmer without confrontation. On the 30th morning, I watched from the porch. The car was packed with boxes, luggage stacked high. Maisie and Greg climbed in, Mom and Dad following behind with heavy steps. Engines roared, tires chewed at the gravel, and dust rose in a cloud around the driveway. I stood there, hands in my pockets, feeling the ache of years condensed into this single moment. Tears pricked my eyes, but I didn't step forward. I didn't wave. I only breathed in the sharp, sunlit air, watching the last of them disappear over the horizon. The farmhouse settled into quiet again, the dust lingering like a memory. The weight that had pressed on me for decades lifted, leaving space I hadn't realized I was holding my breath to claim. The land was mine, the people gone, and finally the future, uncertain but fully my own, stretched ahead. The morning light spilled across the fields, golden and soft, brushing over rows of green that stretched farther than they had in years. I walked barefoot through the soil, feeling it firm beneath my feet, alive in a way it hadn't been when I first inherited it. The fences stood straight, the barn gleamed after a fresh coat of paint, and the irrigation channels ran clear and steady. Crops swayed gently in the breeze, a quiet testament to careful planning, early mornings, and stubborn perseverance. I paused, inhaling the scent of earth and leaves, letting the quiet hum of life wash over me. This was the place I'd defended, nurtured, and claimed. Every seed, every board, every repaired roof had been mine alone. The roadside stand I'd set up had begun drawing regular customers. Locals came for fresh vegetables, herbs, and eggs, their faces familiar, their appreciation genuine. They didn't care about family drama, inheritance, or past disputes. They only cared about the work and the results. It felt good, grounding, and necessary, the kind of validation that mattered. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I'd picture the laughter of my parents or Maisie's easy smiles, the echoes of dinners and arguments, but those thoughts came like shadows, distant, faded, and irrelevant to the life I was building. The past lingered only enough to remind me why I fought so hard. I climbed onto the porch as the sun rose higher, brushing sweat from my brow. The field stretched in every direction, steady and promising. I could finally breathe without the weight of expectation or disappointment pressing down. Everything I'd feared losing had returned stronger, thriving under my care, proof of resilience and patience. I bent to pick a ripe tomato, turning it in my hands, feeling the warmth of the sun through the skin. "Failure, huh?" I whispered softly, letting the words drift across the open land. "Guess failure owns the land now." A soft wind stirred the tops of the crops, carrying my voice across the field. I smiled, alone but complete, the farm vibrant beneath the endless sky. It was mine, fully, utterly, irrevocably. And for the first time in my life, I felt nothing but belonging. Do you think you'd have the courage to stand your ground when everyone else counts you out? Share your thoughts. And don't forget to pass this story along to someone who needs a reminder that holding on to what's yours can change everything.